the last part of this section. So we've talked about the interquartile range and the semi-interquartile range. We talked about how to put in the calculator to find all the missing pieces that we need. The last thing is a thing called standard deviation. Now, all of this part here is important, all the good stuff. The measure of variability is often associated with the arithmetic mean of the standard deviation. Remember, we said the arithmetic mean, when it comes to calculator purposes, is the x of the line over top of it. That's the arithmetic mean. But it's often associated with the arithmetic mean here. Now, the standard deviation definition is right here. Let me highlight that part. So we're going to do it in blue. The standard deviation is this whole part right here, the second sentence. It is a measure of the average amount by which the individual items of data deviate from the arithmetic mean of all the data. Now I'm like, you're like, that makes so much sense, Mr. Hall. Yeah, I get that. And if you don't, it's okay. That's fine. But again, we're talking about keywords that are going on. The keyword here is deviate and arithmetic mean. Those are keywords. You're looking for deviate and arithmetic mean, and that's going to tell us standard deviation. Because we're talking about how things like pretty much are going away from the mean. And we will deal with this more when we do our normal distribution next. That's our next lesson. But we deal with standard deviation more there because it's going to talk about how far apart it is from the mean. How far apart different things are from the mean, the numbers are. So here, the standard deviation, it's not all that bad. And again, if you looked at that list of numbers, I already showed that to you earlier, but the actual standard deviation is actually in that list. So here is what the standard deviation is going to look like. Bam! And you're like, oh my gosh, what is all that? Well, first off, we know 1 over n. We know the square root number here, square root. That's 1 over n. We know n is the number of terms that are there in the problem. We already know what the summation means. We know that we start with 1 and we go all the way up to the highest number, and we're adding these numbers together. Now, this part here, you don't really have to understand what's going on. Only thing is, this part here is your arithmetic mean, that part up here. We know that's what that part is. So the last thing that we need to really understand is we're not using that formula. It's there, but we're not going to use it. All we're going to do is put the numbers in the calculator like we just did earlier when it came to examples 1 and 2. And we're going to just look at that list, and standard deviation is going to be there. It's always going to be there. Now, the only thing that actually is different in the calculator compared to this is that standard deviation is this sideways b with the x inside parentheses. That's how you're going to see it in your calculator. And again, this right here is like a sideways b. So if you want to turn your paper sideways and write a b and then flip it back over, they'll look just like a standard deviation sign. So a sideways b. But here is another, this is what it's going to look like in a calculator. So that's one definition. And here's the last one. Well, first off, before we do that, standard deviation is the most important and widely used measure of variability. And that's why we're going to use that on our next lesson, normal distribution. Now, here's our last thing. Variance. And if you look at it, this means standard deviation squared is the mean of the squares of the deviations from x, from this the arithmetic mean. So standard deviation is, the variance is just the mean of the squares of the deviations. And really, again, here, standard deviation, no, not standard deviation, but variance, sorry. It has the word deviations in it, but it has squares of the deviations. So whenever you see variance, you're thinking of squares, deviations. Squares, deviations. And that's your last vocabulary word here for this section. But also, here's this last thing. Standard deviation is the positive square root of variance. That's not important. It's cool. But standard deviation is always going to be positive. That's pretty much what it's saying. All right, so here's come example 3, and then we're done.